Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar. I see that the numbers are climbing, so I think that we'll be able to get started now. Quick tip from my friends. There we go. There we go. It's good to have people checking that you've got your settings correct. Okay, everyone. So, as I said, thank you very much for joining us for our webinar today, here with Cinema Expert. Today's course is sponsored by Display Technologies, who manufacture projection screens and brackets here in the UK. And we'll be talking about that at the end of the training session. So for those who don't know me, my name is Neil Davidson. I'm the founder of Cinema Expert and Cinema Tools. My email address is neil@cinemaexpert.com. A little bit about Cinema Expert. So I've been involved in the high-end cinema business for more than 15 years now. I love movies as an enthusiast. I've done many training classes for professional groups. I have distribution businesses and manufacturing businesses. And I believe that technical skills really help us all to deliver the best experience for clients. Now, if we can deliver the best experience, of course, that's always going to result in the best for our industry. So Cinema Expert lets me share my knowledge in a structured way in these webinars and other training classes, which I hope will do a little bit to help everyone who's online today to deliver the very best possible cinema experiences. Okay, so Cinema Expert is a developing program, but it will include free resources, the user guides for Cinema Tools, which is a free set of online calculators for cinema design. And we have an extensive knowledge base, which is about to go online. And then, of course, introductory training on special subjects, much as we're going to be doing today. We'll also be introducing paid training, a little bit more on cinema design for professionals. As an example, in January, we hope to run a class on pre-sales cinema design using Cinema Tools, which is a very important and popular subject. Okay, so a little bit of housekeeping for everybody today. The webinar is being held using Zoom Webinar. The webinar is automatically recorded and a recording will be made available after the session. We will have a live Q&A. So I have a little Q&A box open here. So if you look on your Zoom toolbar, you should be able to see that Q&A and you can use that to ask me questions at any time. I will try to answer those questions live during the training, but anything that's not answered, we will address at the end of the session. People are welcome to stay and we can run the session on to answer all of those questions. We also will use one live poll, which allows me to get a little bit of information about the audience that we have so I can tailor the training session. So please take part in the poll. Now, you must have the Q&A enabled to see the polls. So if you haven't done so, please just take a little look at your Zoom toolbar to be able to see all of that stuff. Okay, so with all of that out of the way, we can move on to today's webinar, which is handling aspect ratios in projection. Now, this is a super in-depth topic if we dive into it. What we're going to do in this 1 hour class is try to get a flavor of the subject, some of the things that you need to consider. I won't pretend it's a deep dive into the subject, but I hope it will get you started, just thinking about the different ways that we can handle these things in projection. Okay, so as promised, the first thing that we want to do is I want to get to know you guys. So we're going to have a poll. So I have launched that now. So you should be able to see the live poll on your screen. The first question asks if you have previously sold or installed a home cinema. The second question asks if you've previously sold or installed a projector screen that wasn't the same shape as a TV. The third question asks if you have previously sold or installed a masking projector screen. The fourth one is if you have previously installed or installed an anamorphic lens. And the final one is if you've previously sold or installed a video processor. Now, why don't I just drag this over here? And you can actually see the live poll really live happening. So I think we're just getting the final few people just answering there. We'll give it one more second. Perfect. Okay, so here are the results. Very interesting as always. So a good start. 79% of the people here on our training have installed or sold a home cinema. Hopefully the other 21% are fans of home cinema and are interested in this subject today. Let me see, 79% again have sold or installed a projector screen that wasn't the same shape as a TV. Okay, you're going to be interested in the topic today. Bit closer when it comes to masking. So half of our audience today have installed or sold a masking screen. So that's interesting to know. Again, very similar numbers for an anamorphic lens. And then finally, yeah, a big proportion, 62% have installed a video processor. Okay, good. So we must have a nice high level audience today. So that means I can go a little bit more in depth on the subject when we're talking through these things. Fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to answer the poll. We don't have any more in this session, but it really helps me to get to know the audience that we have. So if we're going to talk about handling aspect ratios, the first thing that we need to do, of course, is understand what is an aspect ratio. Well, aspect ratio just describes the ratio of the image width to the image height. On your screen, you can see a little rectangle of me in the top corner. That aspect ratio is 1.78. In fact, the overall slide also has an aspect of 1.78. All it's doing is just describing the shape, basically. Now, for example, 1.33 to 1 tells us that the image width was 1.33 times the image height. Now, one thing for the rest of this training, and in general, this will be much easier for you. It is always easiest to compare aspect ratios when the height value is 1. So for example, 16 to 9 is the same as 1.77778 to 1, which normally gets shortened to 1.78 to 1. If you refer to it always as something to 1, it makes it much easier to kind of compare the shapes together. 16 to 9, 21 to 9, you know, people don't tend to understand exactly what that is or be able to work it out in their head. Now, we get content delivered in a really wide, and I've bolded that because it's really wide these days, range of aspect ratios. So 1.33, that's kind of old school. We don't see too much of that stuff anymore. 1.78, you can consider normal TV. 2.0, the hot aspect of the day. 2.35, you know, typical CinemaScope movie aspect ratio. And even 2.76. So 2.76, that's classical Ben-Hur. So if you have a client that wants to watch Ben-Hur, you've got to have a pretty big wide screen to give the full effect for them. Now, we have so many aspect ratios due to a combination of artistic and technical and commercial factors. that have come in and out of vogue over the 120 years that we have had motion pictures. I'm sure it won't be a surprise to anyone, especially at this moment in time, to think that movie theatres are always looking for a reason for people to go and see movies. And actually the aspect ratio is one of the first elements, if you like, in attracting the punters in, back in the days of CinemaScope. So let's just have a look and see. So here are some more aspect ratios. Now, the point of this slide is just to try and make you think that the aspect ratio is the shape. It doesn't necessarily determine anything else. Other things dictate the overall size. Aspect ratio is just the shape, so don't get confused with those things. Here we have several different shapes of several different sizes on the screen of different aspects. Probably the main thing to pick up from this one is that the smaller the aspect number, the closer the shape becomes to square, and the bigger the aspect number, the wider the shape becomes. So, where do we find all of these aspects? Well, there are multiple different aspect ratios that impact the projection system. You've got the storage aspect, you've got the content aspect, you have the projector aspect, and you have the screen aspect. Now, our goal is to understand all of these elements to deliver the image on the screen without distortion. So if we move over to the next slide. Let me just make a small adjustment here. So first of all, let's look at the storage aspect. So the storage aspect describes the size and the aspect ratio by the storage medium. So what's a storage medium? Well, that could be a Blu-ray if we're still old school. It could be a 4K disc. It could be delivery over an Apple TV, which I think is probably the most common source that any of us see in a theatre these days. It's typically described in number of pixels, width times height, which then lets us calculate the aspect ratio. So if we just look at a couple of things here. If we look at Blu-ray 1920 by 1080 pixels, well, 1920 over 1080 gives us 1.7778. That's fairly typical aspect. When we move up to UHD, and I've used that term on purpose, incidentally. So UHD is 3840 by 2160. 3840 divided by 2160 is 1.7778. Okay, again, same aspect as our normal experience has always been. Now, I've thrown this last one in there just as a little thought process. If you talk about 4K, 4K is 4096 by 2160. 4096 divided by 2160 is a 1.896 aspect. If you use cinema tools, it will tell you those projectors that are true 4K have a 1.9 aspect through rounding. Now that's important because that, of course, impacts on your throw ratio of your projector. Probably something that we can discuss in another training class, but it's a very important number to be aware of. And in fact, in the Cinema Tools calculator for calculating projector positioning, it really does display to you if a projector is 4K or UHD, because it is an important separation to be aware of. Okay, so that was the storage aspect. The next aspect that we need to be aware of is the content aspect. So the content aspect describes the aspect ratio of the content which is contained within the storage frame. So very simple. That's the movie that is being played out from the Blu-ray or over the Apple TV. Now, there are a couple of really simple rules that you can use to kind of let you work out the content resolution in instances where the content aspect and the storage aspect don't match each other. So if the content aspect is less than the storage aspect, what that means is that the content is narrower than the storage aspect. Therefore, it will fill the full height of the storage aspect. If the content aspect is greater than the storage aspect, it will fill the full width of that storage aspect, but it won't fill the full height. And of course, if they are the same, then happy days. Next, we come to the projector aspect. So the projector aspect describes the native aspect ratio of the projector which will display the content. Now, the native aspect of the projector is typically driven by the content that the projector is intended to display. So what does that mean? Most of our home cinema projectors will have a 1.78 aspect, okay? That's generally what they have. If the projector is intended for playing back 4K cinema content, then it's possible, and in fact likely, that it may have a 4K, so a 1.896 aspect. I'm sure you've all come across business projectors. In fact, it's fairly typical for a business projector to have a 1.6 aspect. You'll have seen that as 16:10. That's a 1.6 aspect. That little bit squarer shape is thought to be better for PowerPoint slides as we're looking at today. Whether that's true or not, who knows? But that's the driving factor behind it. So then finally what we come to is the screen aspect. So the screen aspect describes the native aspect ratio of the screen. So this is our actual projector screen that we're referring to now. What's interesting with the screen aspect is that's really driven by the use case of the projection system. We're going to cover that in more detail over the next few slides in the training. We're going to deep dive into how you can play with the screen aspect. So here we discuss projecting the content. If the content aspect does not match the projector aspect, or if the projector aspect does not match the screen aspect, you may get black bars projected at the top or at the side, or both if you're unlucky, of the image on the screen. Now, typically clients don't like black bars, unused space. And one of the best things about a projection system over a flat panel system is that we can manipulate the image much, much, much more. We have lenses, we can do things to the image to change the shape and optimize the display of an aspect ratio. So moving forward, what we're going to do next is we're going to look at the starting point. What's the typical situation that we have in these systems? So, typical starting point of a normal home theater projection system. The most common situation is that the storage aspect is 1.78. The projector aspect is also 1.78, and the screen aspect is also 1.78. The thing that is not, sadly, 1.78 is the content. These days we get so many different types of content aspects that we can basically assume that they are always going to be varying. So what we want to do is let's have a quick look and see what that means for the content that's seen on the screen. So what the slide shows here is a piece of 1.78 content that's shown by the green frame. That would be the native image projected from our projector on a 1.78 screen. And as you can see, that fills the screen properly. We have no black bars and no complexity to worry about. However, if we move over to a 1.33 image, what you can see is that that 1.33 piece of content would have black bars at the left and at the right of the screen. This area here and this area here would have no content within them. Here's a piece of 2.4 content on that same 1.78 screen. Again, what you can see is this area here above the content and this area here below the content, that wouldn't have anything projected into it. That would be a black bar. Now, before we go any further into this, I should say that there are many situations where this is the reality, okay? The choice was made and this is the appropriate setup for the system. An example that's actually becoming quite interesting is with ultra short throw projection. I'm sure quite a lot of people in this training will have been looking at some of these new ultra short throw projectors, which can produce very big images from being right next to the wall, to be honest with you. Now, you're not going to be able to do many fancy tricks to alter the image size with those projectors, but just being able to have a great projection experience from so close to the wall is already okay. So that would be a perfectly valid situation where you might want to just have this simple setup. And there are lots more, but that's one that I particularly like with the ultra short throw projectors. Now, the first thing that we can do to kind of manipulate our system to handle screen aspect ratios is we can look at how we change the screen aspect. Wouldn't it be fantastic if somehow the screen aspect could be made to vary along with the content aspect? Well, great news is that we can achieve that, and we achieve that by using a motorized masking screen. So the good news is that 52% of people already know what I'm talking about, but for the 48% of people who didn't know what that was, we're going to try and show that on the next slide here. So here we go back to our piece of 2.4 content showed on our 1.78 screen. And remember, this area here are empty of content. It's just the way that the content is stored in the storage medium. Is that? Now, you can have many arguments about projector contrast and all of the rest of the things, but a pure white projector screen will always be lighter than the black frame. And the reason that the black frame is chosen is for technical reasons. What it actually does is it serves to enhance dramatically the contrast of the image. If you put a frame on anything like that, it dramatically enhances the contrast. So what we would ideally like to do is we would like to have the edges of the screen match up with the edges of the content. And we can do that with motorized masking, which does something like that. Slides in and it fills up that area. Now I think that you can actually see even in this slide the difference that that makes to the contrast. If I just do that, it's really quite a dramatic difference. Now, one of the things that I would say about masking, it's difficult to appreciate the benefit that that has on the image and on the overall experience unless you have experienced it yourself. And if you have a showroom and you would be interested to sell masking, it's actually one of the easiest things in the whole of home cinema to sell to a client, the benefits of a masking screen, because it will improve their experience also. You have to be able to demo it though. It's very, very difficult to just explain it. If you can show it though, people will believe. Now, when it comes to specifying masking, where the content aspect and the storage aspect don't match, the following happens. This is a bit similar to what we already covered. If the content aspect is less than the screen aspect, the content will fill the full height of the screen and you will get black bars either side of the content. The solution is to use a side masking screen to solve that. If the content is greater than the screen aspect, then it will fill the full width of the content and you will get black bars above and below. Sorry, the content will fill the full width of the screen and you will have black bars above and below the content. So the solution is top and bottom masking. Okay. Now, if you are looking at this and you add the two things together, sometimes you have content which is less than the screen aspect, and sometimes you have content which is greater than the screen aspect. And I'm sure you will not be surprised to find that you can get four-way masking screens. So four-way masking is the ultimate solution. It lets you frame all content perfectly. Of course, that's the premium option in the market. Okay. We've had a question come in. How do you detect the content aspect to steer the masking? Now, that's actually something that I'm going to cover a little bit later. I just wanted to mention that question has come in. And it's a very good question. So everyone listening might want to just have a little think about that as we continue to go through the next couple of slides until I address it. Okay, so moving forward. So doing masking correctly is very important to set the client's expectations when you specify masking. What that means is, of course, if you do a two-way masking, there is always a very small chance that you get black bars with some content. Perhaps the guy puts on an old movie on a top and bottom masking screen and he has black bars at the side. That happens quite often. Perhaps something else comes up, maybe he plays a game on his PC or something like that. So it's very important that when you do specify masking, you discuss the trade-offs very carefully with the client. Or if you're buying masking for yourself, it's important to understand the trade-offs. If you do two-way masking, you always have a small risk that you still will see a black bar. Now, if you are investing in a masking screen and it hasn't been explained to you that very specific types of content may have a black bar, that can be incredibly frustrating. It's one of the mistakes I have seen is that people say, by masking, you won't have black bars. Just be a little bit careful of that. Now, the secret, of course, is just to be honest with the client. Now, your chosen masking solution must support all aspects between the open and close position. Now, this is a really, really important one. What does that mean? It means that the masks must move from the frame edge towards where the content is. You used to be able to buy drop-down side masking as an example. And that's just a dreadful solution. It's truly one of the worst solutions that you can sell to somebody, is drop-down side masking. Only slightly less bad than that is masking that only supports one preset position. The reason that I say that about those two solutions is there are so many different aspect ratios now. It's impossible to say that one position or two positions will serve for everything. Now, I would imagine that almost everyone here has Netflix these days, and Netflix, almost all of its own content is in a 2.0 aspect. And if you show that on a screen with drop-down side masking, or a screen with a single position stop, you risk disappointing your client with either black bars or hidden content. So try to avoid that one at all costs. The second is it needs to be as easy as possible to operate. Now, anyone who has sold a masking screen is probably familiar with the idea of making presets. You make a preset per aspect ratio. Well, what I say is don't rely on presets, because honestly, it's super annoying having to set all of those presets. If it's possible, do insist on aspect-driven masking. Now, what that is a solution where you simply ask a screen to go to a defined aspect ratio, and it will do what is necessary. I guess it's no surprise that's a feature on our sponsor, Display Technologies, masking projector screens. Now, the final thing is to try and understand and make sure your customer understands if one-way, two-way, or four-way masking is most appropriate. We haven't covered one-way masking in this training, and we're not going to in depth, but it is valid if you have moving masks to do a one-way masking solution. It's a good bridge to more complex systems. Two-way top and bottom or two-way side are great options. And then four-way masking, of course, lets you cover everything. Now, we've had a couple of questions come in here. So here is a really great question. What about speaker positioning versus screen masking? So I hadn't intended to cover that one, but it's a great question. Now, probably the question is related specifically to an acoustically transparent projector screen. So an acoustically transparent projector screen is one that lets the sound travel through it. Now, there are lots of guides to where you should position your speakers relative to the seating position. For anyone who's watching, if you haven't seen it, if you visit cinematools.com, you will be able to find our speaker location calculator, and it will actually tell you exactly where the speakers should go to comply with the guidelines from various content companies. So that's a very, very useful tool. Now, what you will find is that for a well-sized 1.78 aspect screen, the left and right speakers typically will be outside the screen with the center speaker behind it. Therefore, the masking won't cover that speaker. If you go for a wider aspect screen, and I've used that on purpose because we will cover that a little bit later, there's every chance that the speakers will actually be placed just inside the screen frame, which means that they will be behind the masking. Now, the good news is that most companies that sell an acoustically transparent projector screen, the masking will also be acoustically transparent. The big challenge for you is just to make sure that you do not put the speaker directly behind the metal mask bar. That's the one thing that the projector manufacturer cannot, or the projector screen manufacturer cannot solve. It's pretty easy normally to do if you just take a little bit of care in laying out your aspect ratios over your projector screen when you're doing your drawings, and you just make sure that you don't land specifically the tweeter of the speaker at a point where it might get covered up by the mask bar. Okay, so that was a good one. A second question here. So this one's not directly related, but how would we determine the optimum screen size within a cinema? Well, in fact, again, I would refer you to www.cinema-tools.com. And on there you will find our free viewing angle calculator. And the viewing angle calculator will actually show you the optimum distance based on the screen size. It actually also has correction factors in there for the screen aspect to enable you to really optimize the layout of a cinema with a different aspect ratio screen. So again, totally free. You don't need to do anything. Just go straight on and punch the details into the calculator. Okay. Good. Those were some good questions, everyone. Please keep them coming. So now we've covered masking. The next thing that we want to look at is changing the projector aspect. Okay. So this is the next level in the system. We've seen that screen masking is really an effective way to match the content and the screen aspects. It works well in almost all systems and is relatively straightforward. Now, this approach means that 2.4 content material is always going to be shorter than 1.78 material. And you'll typically hear that described as constant image width projection. So CIW projection. An alternative approach is to actually vary the projected image size so that all of the content is delivered with the same height. And you will hear that described as constant image height projection. So CIH and CIW, you may see these acronyms and that's what they stand for. Now, the first method that we can use, and perhaps the easiest approach to changing the image height, is to get on your remote control and change the zoom. We use the motorized zoom function to adjust the image so that it fills the height of the screen. Now, obviously that comes with some considerations. I've put this one here, not even as a consideration. If you are going to use motorized zoom, you have to make sure that the projector is installed so that you can correctly project both small enough and large enough to fill the screen. And you would still not believe how many times we see people getting that little bit wrong there. That's a really, really important mistake to avoid if setting up a motorized zoom system. Now, Of course, the easiest way to do that is to just jump on the remote control. But you will actually find that, let's say most home cinema projectors now actually have memories. And what those memories do is they store the zoom, the lens shift, and the lens focus as a preset, which you can recall so that you can create various different aspect ratios. Now, there are some other considerations that you must take into account. You've got image overscan, you've got possibly changing brightness of the image, you have ease of use to consider, and you have the transition time. So let's take a look at that. So here is, now we've moved over to a 2.4 aspect projector screen. The typical aspect that would be used, 2.37, 2.39, 2.4. Let's bunch them all together with the term cinemascope, a cinemascope aspect projector screen. What you see now, this would be your native projection. So this would be with the projector to fill the height of the screen. And this would show your 1.78 aspect and below content as big as possible on the screen. But what you can see is that when it comes to showing something like 2.4 content, wow, there's like all this empty space. No client's going to be happy to see all this empty space and all this empty space and all this empty space and all this empty space. We have to be able to do something about that to project the image as well as possible. Now in the motorized zoom, you zoom out the image, so it gets a lot bigger, okay? Now you can see that the 2.4 content is filling the screen fully. But we did mention those considerations. So the first thing that you've got to consider is the overscan. So now this section here and this section here, as you can see, they're not being projected onto the screen. They're on the screen frame and a little bit onto the wall behind. It would make sense to do something to make sure that that doesn't show up. My nice graphic behind shows a bias light being used. Personal taste bias lighting. If you want to get crazy with RGBW lighting, we'll be delighted to assist with something like that. The really great technical way of doing it is to use a proper bias light calibrated to D65, just to have a very, very, very faint shadow around the screen. It cures all of your problems of image overscan, and it can actually help to relieve a little bit of eye strain and give a better contrast impression. You'll hear lots of people debate whether it's needed about a projector screen or not, but that is an option for people who like to do backlighting. So our example was just a quick one, and you can see how we were able to fill the screen by making the image bigger. Now, the problem with making the image bigger is that the light output of the projector is now being spread over a bigger area. And what that can lead to is a loss of brightness. You will often hear that being used as a big negative of motorized zoom. But I have to tell you that there is a little quirk of lenses, a thing that we call brightness factor. And it's to do with aperture sizes and f-stops in lenses, okay? One for the photographers. We'll not dive into that whole thing. But basically what it means is, as you zoom in and out, the actual light that passes through the lens increases and decreases. And on some lenses, that change in light can be plus and minus 20%. It can be very dramatic. So in fact, what you find is that the change in brightness is not directly the same as the change in area. And on some projectors, there's actually very little change at all when you move between those two. So it's something to be aware of, but it's also one not to get overly hung up on. You also find a lot of projectors now, of course, will program the brightness. If it's a laser projector, the laser brightness can be set very quickly, and they can often be stored in the preset along with the lens shift and zoom and focus. Now, another consideration, of course, is the ease of use. Ease of use is a big factor. And here perhaps I will go to the question that was asked earlier about how can you detect the aspect ratio. Now, wouldn't it be fabulous if you had a fully automized masking and aspect ratio control system? Well, I'm here to tell you right now that that can absolutely be achieved very straightforwardly. The downside, of course, is that you may need to have some additional budget available to do that. Now, there are two devices that can be used to measure the aspect ratio. I know that, for example, all of the projectors from Barco Residential have aspect ratio detection built right into them. That aspect ratio detection can be used, of course, to then optimize the projector screen masking or any other changes that you want to have happen in the system. You will also find that some of the higher end video processors, a product such as a MAD VR or a Lumagen, they also have aspect ratio detection built right into them. And they are able to, again, provide that data so that the rest of the system can be driven around it. There's distinct benefits depending on those approaches. And I do have a couple of slides about that later on, but that's one of the things that you can do. Now, I have another question here that's, yeah, it's an interesting one. So with subtitles on Netflix, which you can't put higher, how would you handle the masking? That's a good question, and it's one that us native English speakers tend to forget, which I apologize for. What we typically see in those systems is that the best thing to do is kind of do a little bit of an in-between. If we were doing that for our 2.4 content here, we would not quite fill the width of the screen. We would maybe bring the masks out a little bit so that the bottom edge of the image was still a few centimeters above so that the whole subtitle could be seen. Now, there are actually very sophisticated ways of handling all of that. It's probably a little bit too in-depth for this training class, but it's certainly something that we're delighted to discuss. If you want to hang around afterwards, we can kind of look into those things as well. It can be handled. Typically means leaving a little bit of black bar at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so moving on. The next method that we would probably see would be electronic zoom. So here the projected aspect is set so that it fills the screen and all of the other aspects are created inside that by scaling. So again, you've got to consider the overscan. Here you've perhaps got to consider loss of resolution, and it does require advanced scaling in either the projector or the video processor. So we're now back to that typical situation. We've set up our screen and our projector so that our screen is filled. Now, with the electronic zoom method, we are not going to change the zoom on the projector. What we're going to use is electronic scaling to size the image to fit within the screen. Something like that. So the green frame, that represents the actual projected output. As you can see, that's still overscanning, as we discussed already. But now the 1.78 aspect is being shown clearly inside the screen. Now, this one I've put after motorized, specifically because you have to have the means of doing that scaling. Now, quite a lot of projectors do have that 1.78 shrink scaling built into them. But if you want to support all of those aspects, you will really need to have quite a powerful solution in your projector, or you will need to use an external video processor. So therefore, there's typically more of a cost implication than anything else when looking at using electronic zoom over motorized zoom. The big benefit of electronic zoom is the speed. If you do motorized zoom, you will understand that there is a certain amount of time whilst the lenses are moving. With electronic zoom, it happens pretty much instantly. It just flicks to the correct aspect. So it means that you lose resolution. You're shrinking the content within the projected area. However, you're perhaps offering the client a better experience. It's something that you must discuss and understand. If it's for your own system also, you must understand that's the trade-off that you are making. Speed and convenience versus a bit of resolution loss. Okay. We've had another question come in here. Okay, this is a good question. So if we are using a media player and the output is set to 1.78, then all the media is in that, even if it's 4.3 content. Now, how can a projector or a video processor detect that? Well, in fact, what they will do is they look at the black bars that are encoded within the storage frame, if you want to put it that way. The actual content itself, if it is going into a 1.78 storage aspect, which it all is, it still has to be a 1.78 overall aspect. It's just the unused area will be black. That's what's encoded within the content. So that the content still exists, let's say, it's just black. That's the best way of answering that. Now, what the projectors do and what the video processors do is they actually analyze the number of pixels of that black content, and they use that to determine what the content aspect is. Really, really cool solution. Very, very powerful. And that is how you are able to get the aspect detection working, even though, in fact, in reality, pretty much all of the content that we are viewing is going to be in a 1.78 storage container. So next method is an anamorphic lens. Now, we used to have two options for anamorphic lenses, but in fact, there seems to be one big king in the hill these days. And that's the Panamorph Paladin vertical compression lenses. And that's the only ones that we ever see these days ourselves. So vertical compression is the method that they are using to change the image. I have a little set of slides just coming up that explain that to you. Now, considerations of an anamorphic lens, of course, it's the cost. You have the potential brightness gains. You have the negative of optical artifacts. And again, it's the question of how much advanced scaling do you want to have, and do you have that in the projector or the video processor? So here is our native projection once again. Now, when you are using the vertical compression lens, you set it up as we did with the electronic zoom. You are over scanning the image. Okay. That's your first step actually of the setup, is to make sure you've got the width of the screen filled. What you then do is you actually use video processing to stretch that image. It's typically 1.33 times that you stretch the image by. I'm sure some of you who are more knowledgeable will know that some of those lenses now are 1.25, but typically it was always 1.33 times. Now, to do that stretch, you have to have a scaling built into either your projector or your video processor to handle that. And I will say that most projectors do have that scaling to handle 2.4 content and 1.78 content. The challenge is all of the other aspect ratios. Now, once you've done your electronic stretch, when the lens is in place, the lens actually squeezes it, vertically compresses the image that's passing through that. So what that means is that rather than having any overscan, everything is now on the screen. That's been done with an optical process within the lens itself. Now, you may gain brightness because of that, because all of the light is now being directed onto the screen. You can gain some pixel density. It's not true to say that you gain pixels per se. You gain pixel density, because remember, the image is being scaled at all times when you're using the lens. Now, the VC lenses are designed to be left in place the whole time. So this is kind of the optimal solution that you're looking at here if you are only interested in CinemaScope. The problem, of course, as I've mentioned, is if you want to watch a 1.78 aspect piece of content, that has to be electronically shrunk. You are losing, therefore, 1.33 times of the resolution, a third of the resolution has to go. And if you want to be able to support, for example, 2.0 content, which is Netflix again, which is, unavoidable these days, you must have more than just those standard bits of programming, those scaling functions within the projector. So that again can lead to more cost. The lens is expensive, and if you want to have full support for all aspects without any trade-offs, then the video processor can also be expensive. So there's one other solution that's on the market now that lets you do this, and that's a projector with a native CinemaScope aspect ratio. So as far as I am aware, that is an exclusive solution of Barco Residential. If anyone knows different, please feel free to correct me and I will be happy to change that. The big consideration of this one, of course, is the cost of the projector. If you saw some of the other solutions, an anamorphic lens, there is a lens cost and possibly a video processor cost. So that must always be considered when looking at the cost of the native CinemaScope projector. Now what we have here is that's the native projection coming out of the projector, filling the screen, filling our constant image height screen. There's no overscan, there's no brightness loss or anything like that. If we show 1.78 content on that same system, it is once again shown without any loss of resolution, without any change of brightness. The transition happens very quickly. So it's an extremely convenient and easy way to deliver constant image height projection. If you remember, the projector will also do the aspect ratio detection, which can then be used to automate the rest of the system. So it's a very, 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 very simple way of delivering constant image height projection. Okay. So that's the end of the main slides for today. So let's look at the conclusions that we can draw. So projection systems offer much more flexibility, an opportunity to enhance the content experience than a fixed display does. What we've seen is that there are several methods that you can use to alter the overall size and presentation of the content. And what's best is going to depend on many factors, okay? They all have benefits and they all have negatives. And you should decide which is best for the project and the situation that you are looking at. You must always give careful consideration to the client experience. Is the method that you are proposing easy for them to benefit from? That for me is the biggest one. It has to be simple. For many years, we saw people selling masking and trying to explain, yeah, look, we've put all of these buttons on the side of your control panel, and when the screen size changes, you've got to press these buttons. No one wants that. It's confusing. So changes where everything just happens and just happens perfectly is a really, really hard experience to beat. So that would be my advice. Try to make it just happen. Okay, guys. Final note, the course was again sponsored by Display Technologies, www.displaytechnologies.co.uk. DT screens are all aspect ratio driven, thanks to the proprietary mask position logic system. And the slogan DT, innovating, not replicating, is what the company is all about. So you can check that one out, and thanks for their support. Now, we do have a few more questions. Anyone who is watching, just a reminder, the training is recorded. So if people need to leave, you can go back and you can view this now, no problem at all. It will be recorded and it will get posted. The link will be posted on our Facebook page so that you are able to easily find that. And I think we will probably email it to everybody after the session as well. For anyone who has questions, please feel free to crash them into the question and answer box, and we can go through those. No problem at all. Be happy to do that. So one of the questions that we have here is perhaps the best solution is a projector that has perfect black bars at the side or the top and bottom of its own. Well, I guess in theory that would be the case. I haven't seen that projector yet. There's always talk of higher and higher contrasts and using grey screens, for example, is also something that we see being spoken about a lot. But I think that you've got to look at the reality of a room. What you actually get in a projected system is the image is actually light being reflected off a screen. For me, the best projected image comes from a white screen. Now, if you have a theatre where you have any lights whatsoever, then they will also be reflected off of that white screen. Therefore, it's impossible to have a completely black border, regardless of the contrast of the projector. Now, people may say, but I have a complete black box cinema, and I say good luck to those people. That's not my personal taste. I don't want to sit with my family in complete darkness It's just not something that would ever appeal to me. There's also a safety factor. If you have a theatre with seating tiers or anything like that, you have to be able to mark those out. They have to have a light on them. Otherwise, it simply becomes dangerous. So it's interesting, but I don't believe that, infinity to one contrast will ever be the solution, because it will be impossible to achieve just because of environmental factors. Cool as though it would be. Okay, I think I saw a little one coming up on the chat there, did I? Chat. So, how annoying could an automatic screen ratio change be when media browsing? So the ratios and the masking change back and forth. So good question. There's two ways that you see that being tackled. Typically, the first way is that the detection doesn't happen instantly. A lot of systems now, you can actually program how long the system should wait before it responds to a change. I mean, it can be detected on a frame-by-frame basis, but that would indeed perhaps be annoying. So typically something 3 to 5 seconds as a delay is used. Now, that smooths out the experience greatly. The next one, no one's asked it yet, I'm amazed, but of course, Mr. Christopher Nolan and his habit of switching aspect ratios in movies. It really doesn't happen that often, I have to say. Yeah, there we go. We have Christopher Nolan now being mentioned. Good. The actual switch doesn't happen that often. Sorry, isn't that prevalent in content. I mean, Nolan has got like, what, 8 movies that he does it in? Now, if I take Batman, for example, my experience of that tends to be with barcode projectors with a display technology screen, and it handles those transitions pretty much seamlessly. I don't really notice it. Only once have I personally seen it that the switches were happening too often, and that was actually with a music video. It was Ed Sheeran of all things, and it was happening just a little bit too quickly. The masks would get to where they needed to be, and then it would change again, so the masks were constantly moving. Now, the solution in that instance is to have an override function in the control system. Something that is asked often is if the projector could be plugged directly to the screen, or the video processor could be plugged directly to the screen. And this is the reason specifically why I never recommend that. On the surface, of course, it seems super cool, hands off, all automated. But if you did that, you would remove the ability of the user to just push a button and override that whole thing. And that's what I recommend is you have a button on the control system that if this is happening, despite all the measures taken, then they can just push a button and they can lock the aspect for an hour or something like that. It's how you program it, of course, but that's the way to handle it. Okay. Okay, another good question's come in here. So are there any stats available on how much content is delivered in CinemaScope that you can use when talking to customers? Well, it kind of depends, like all of these things do. For Hollywood content, it's about 75 to 80%, in fact. It really is as high as that is delivered in those CinemaScope aspects. What we are actually seeing more and more often is, like if you think of Netflix and all of these amazing shows on Netflix, I don't know if anyone's watched The Queen's Gambit, for example. Fantastic show, beautifully shot, really enjoyable. 2.0 aspect. Those things are almost becoming as important as just pure movies now. So it's not now a case like it used to be of saying, do you watch movies only or do you watch TV only? The line between the two is blurring, in my opinion. An aspect ratio issues are inevitable. Therefore, we always try to kind of talk to people and yeah, advise them. This is always going to be a factor. Aspects of content changing are always going to be a factor. So make sure that you are aware of it, and make sure that you've discussed it with your client. If you've discussed it, they've decided not to go ahead, and then they phone up to complain about black bars, you're in a much, much stronger position. Okay, so can masking be triggered by certain home automation systems such as Control 4, URC, etc.? Well, obviously that will depend a little bit on the screen and the projector. Most of them have IP or RS-232 control, so normally that should be absolutely no problem at all. What you really want to have, and honestly even a Harmony remote control perhaps could do it, is have a little scene set up so that any changes made in the projector that need to be made to the screen, and which would be made maybe in a video processor, would all happen on one button press. They'd all be triggered by one button press. That obviously, again, that's the best experience for your client. Okay, do we have any more questions, or everyone satisfied? I think that's us. I think that's us. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for giving up your time this morning. I hope you found that enjoyable. Remember, if you have any questions on this material, you can go to info@cinemaexpert.com. You can send an email. And we have our Facebook page, which you can use to ask any questions and keep up with upcoming trainings. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your time today. It's been fantastic, and I'll see you next time.